Hi, everyone. Wow, what a great group. I love smaller groups because usually when there's, like 30 people, I'm like up against like this, trying to speak. So, I like to roam a little bit, and welcome to Vegan Around the World. Pam said some nice things about me, but it's really about the fact that I'm in the company of some wonderful people who I've known for years, and now I get to meet you guys too. And when was the last time you thanked Pam for all she does? So let's thank Pam and give her a hand. Thank you. And also like to say hello and a shout out to the online people. We're being taped today for Hippocrates Online. And I think it's great that they're doing online. But let me call them out for a second, which is, one of my sayings is, an ounce of experience is worth more than a ton of theories. An ounce of experience is worth more than a ton of theories. So it's great that you're doing it online, but however you want to look at it, you got to come here to these 50 acres here at Hippocrates Health Institute in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I live in West Palm Beach, Florida, only 9 miles from here. And as I like to say, it's almost unfair that I live here because we get to come here and not only go through the programs, but then when we live here, we get to come on a regular basis and eat from the buffet, the best food this side of heaven. So we're going to talk today I'm going to tell you about my travels around the world, in large part sharing the vegan message. And I was able to do that with a program, is this working? Yeah, called Remote Year, remoteyear.com. And it's probably not for everybody, but Remote Year, what they do is, it's an organization, they gather location-independent professionals, and we spent an entire year traveling, working, seeing the world, and 1 month in each city, we connected with local cultures and business ecosystems. I formed lifelong, borderless, personal and professional relationships along the way. And as you can see from that listing, where, pray tell, did they take us? Well, they took us 3 months in Europe, Croatia, Czech Republic, Portugal, then 3 months in Asia, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, and then 6 months in North and South America, including Argentina and Peru and Colombia and Mexico. And I actually have a PowerPoint presentation that we won't do today. We're going to touch on some things about my Remote Year travels. I have a PowerPoint that's based on my best-selling book. I'm an international bestseller with this book, my first book that I ever wrote. It's called Have Laptop Will Travel. And as a gift, I have brought a copy for each one of you. And I'll be happy to sign it for you, but that costs extra. Wait, they think I'm joking. That costs extra. So a little bit about the book. So the format today, and I think we'll have plenty of time to get everything in, and then we'll have some question and answers if you like. I'm going to tell you about the travels themselves, how I did it, what I did. And I think the total is close to 40 lectures in 1 year's time. And across those countries, 15 countries, dozens and dozens of lectures in different languages that I don't speak, I was able to really, I think, fine-tune the message for at least for me, what I think it means for me to be vegan. Why be vegan? What's this vegan thing all about? So a little bit about the book. Digital nomad. Have you guys heard of this? This is an emerging thing especially with the millennials. It's tied in with the gig economy, where people can run their business remotely from their laptop and their smartphone. And so I traveled with 48 other people. They included coders, computer coders, people who wrote apps, a person who designed microchips that are found in today's smartphones, a Hollywood agent who did nothing all day and sometimes all night reading screenplays, trying to find the next Hollywood movie hit, a couple retired people. And then there was me. I own and manage a property portfolio. I've been investing in commercial real estate, building commercial real estate, developing commercial real estate for the last 25 years, and my property portfolio includes 5 different states. I'm building a shopping center right now in Pennsylvania, and that was actually started Working remotely, I had conference calls and even video conference calls with engineers, architects, bankers, leasing agents. And I was able to do all of that remotely on a piece of dirt that was maybe 6,000 miles away. So I joined a band of these 48 intrepid travelers. And as you can imagine, the book is broken up into 12 chapters, 12 cities and 12 months. So each chapter is the city that I lived in. So as you can imagine, living in a place for 12 months, you experience life not so much as a tourist, but really as a resident. And I think that was really the value. The people that I met, the way that I learned a city, learned my way around town, started learning the language. I studied Spanish for 6 months. And just as you get to learn a city, whether it's Buenos Aires or whether it's Lima, Peru, or whether it's Kyoto, Japan, just as I learned a city on the 30th day, it's time to go and it's time for the next frontier. And I got to admit, that started to get a little bit of addicting to go to the next frontier. And it was, new restaurants, new Wi-Fi passwords, new Tinder profiles, and I actually worried at the end of it last year when it came to an end. I wondered, would I be able to go back to this normal life, where it's just here in West Palm Beach and going to my office on Clematis Street, and what would that be like? But the truth is, my parents live here. And it was really almost like I had never left to come back. And last but not least, some people love this about the book, and some people are like, well, I didn't know it was going to be such a vegan book. There are, and I couldn't help myself, but there are prominent vegan themes throughout the book, especially when I talk about my lectures, especially when I talk about some of the things I saw as it related to the deeper meaning of vegans. People who went to a church where the miracle of Fatima, where the Virgin Mary appeared in Portugal, and it's a holy site. And for hundreds of years now, people go there to the shrine where the Virgin Mary appeared, and they walk on their knees. I have video of it. It's in another presentation of mine. They walk on their knees to the shrine to ask for what? They ask for forgiveness, they ask for health, they ask for mercy. And it struck me as so ironic, and I write about this in the book. How can we ask for mercy? How can we ask for health? How can we ask for peace in our life if exactly the opposite's on our plate? And so those are some of the themes that are going on in my book. The last issue of Healing Our World, How, is a story about my trip, which is still in the holding area in Wigmore Hall. I saw that they still had the previous one. So now we have, and the sound wasn't working here, so I brought my own sound. I have 2 clickers. One of the clicker actually failed. I am a PADI master, dive master. I have 700 log dives in 18 different water columns around the world. Half of those dives are right out here in the Atlantic Ocean, some of the best diving in the world. And one thing we learned, and I learned, actually it's life or death, is redundancy. I always try to have 2 of everything. If I like a pair of jeans, I'll go back and buy a second one. And I brought my own speaker in case this one had failed, and it did. And I brought 2 clickers, which had already failed. And so here's a video about the trip, and I'm going to narrate while it's playing. After we're done talking about my travels, then I actually go into my signature lecture that I gave in many countries in a couple different languages. So that's going to be the format for today. And then the lecture itself actually will be emailed to Pam. And then do you still use Google Drive? You use Dropbox? Okay, you can download it and put it on Dropbox. Both of them, actually, you guys have me on Wednesday, and we're going to talk about the ethics of eating. We're going to talk about the animals. Although I don't use any videos or any pictures of the animals. I tried that years back, and people are just running for the door. And I actually, Brian mentored me about it, gave me some good advice, and some other people. And I don't use any pictures. Here's the video. Can you hear okay? Yeah. Of course, you see I was working very hard. Can you see? Oh, sorry. That's me doing some paperwork. We did a side trip to India, World Peace Diet Speaking Tour with Dr. Will Tuttle, who you will learn about. We visited 10 cities. We did 15 events in 12 days. I was kind of like he's a best-selling author, a leader in the vegan space. I was kind of like his warm-up band. And I spoke 5 to 10 minutes about Hippocrates and about my version of vegan. This was in Japan, in Tokyo. Had a translator as the vegan meetup group of Japan. This is in Malaysia. There were groups, sometimes they were big, sometimes they were small. She's interviewing me for an online magazine. Oh. This is Kathmandu, Nepal. I was the keynote speaker at the Asian Pacific Vegetarian Conference. And they speak English there. I could not have traveled around the world for a whole year and do what I did without a regular yoga practice and also transcendental meditation and also the NewCom app. Are you guys using the NewCom app? Or the NewCom system that they have here? You should, if you can do it, you should purchase it because it's great. Greetings from Lisbon, Portugal. Check out the trolley. Trolley's in Lisbon, Portugal. See you in Japan. See you in Japan. That's the bullet train in Japan. From Kyoto to Tokyo, it takes 2 hours and 20 minutes on the bullet train. It runs about 200 miles an hour, and it will take you about 9 hours if you drove. This, I was speaking in, actually that's Kyoto. Found time to have some fun. Skiing, and people don't think of Japan for skiing, but it has great skiing. Chiang Mai, Thailand. We were there for 5 weeks. My temporary home in Chiang Mai, Thailand. It's a little loud. That's the Wildflower Home. That is a shelter for young mothers that I volunteered at, and I actually gave a sprout workshop there. I gave a sprout workshop, and 10% of the proceeds from my book go to the shelter. And they really touched my heart being there. So it never occurred to them. I was actually there doing some construction work, believe it or not. And it never occurred to them to not cook the mung beans. So I went to the head lady, I said, can I give them a sprout workshop? She said yes. So 3 weeks later, I get an instant message from one of the organizers with a picture of this huge bowl of sprouts. They were obviously having lunch when I was long gone. So I think I got through to them, and it sounds corny, but that was one of the greatest accomplishments of my life. And this is scuba diving in Thailand. It's actually, you can see it's colorful and beautiful. Not the best diving I've ever done, but definitely there. And this is what it's like to be a digital nomad. I get paperwork from my office, and what I can't do electronically, I do with physical paperwork. Kuala Lumpur is the month I became a vegan celebrity, a vegebrity. And they organized 5 events for me. And everyone speaks English in Malaysia. It's actually, with all the factions there, English is like the language that everyone uses to hold themselves together. And then we went to Argentina. I started writing my book there. Actually, my other book about veganism, which I'll tell you about. And Lima, Peru. It's very beautiful, right? Started writing my book. The Vegan Manifesto, which is what we're going to talk about today. The 5 health principles to save humanity. Took Spanish class for 6 months. This is Argentina. We built solar panels out of Coke bottles to make hot water heaters in houses in impoverished neighborhoods. And I'm a songwriter and musician, so I always tried to find a place, some buddies to jam with wherever I went. Found a guitar, found an amplifier. This is in Argentina. They were protesting the fact that there was a lot of inflation in Argentina. People don't think of Peru as having sand dunes, but they have sand dunes. This is in Medellin. These two people, this lady, remember Bibi, Pam? That's a health educator. And she translated for me in Medellin. And now we're going to talk about World Peace Diet and the second set of lectures I went to, or speaking tour. We did India the year before, and then late last year we went through Europe, including Greece. I told the Greek people, because I speak a little Greek, if you want to really be Greek, you have to eat vegan, because like Hippocrates and a lot of the ancients. He's a vegan bodybuilder. It's amazing. We did 8 countries in Europe in 2.5 weeks. Like every city, every day you wake up and you go to a new place and we speak. It's not easy. I don't know how these, Will Tuttle is almost 70 years old. I don't know how he does it, but he does it. All right. That was my apartment in Thailand. Pretty cool, right? Yeah. We had good times there. So, have you guys heard of the World Peace Diet? The World Peace Diet, okay, so once a year, Will Tuttle, this guy, comes here and he spends a couple days with the health educators and they do a lecture in Wigmore Hall. And the World Peace Diet is a lot of what you're going to hear today is it is in large part a lot of the big ideas from the World Peace Diet, also, Hippocrates' version of things and others, and my own synthesis. The World Peace Diet was written by Will Tuttle. He's considered a visionary speaker, best-selling author. He's a piano virtuoso and composer, and we'll have some video. You'll hear from him in a minute. And on Wednesday, when we talk about the ethics of eating, you're going to get more video and a message from Will. And I'm happy to say that right now we're putting together an Asia speaking tour later this year for about 3 weeks in December. Indonesia, Bali, which is Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, and some other places. And so here is a video from our Eastern Europe tour. It says March 2018, but that's not true. We were there. I don't know how that got in there. We were there in October. Greece, Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia, Slovakia, Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic. And we do all that in a couple weeks.
Hey guys, where are we? We're here at the Acropolis in Athens. And it's a beautiful day, a Saturday afternoon. We're right in front of the Muses, foundation of Western civilization in many ways. We're here in ancient Greece, all around us, and we're thinking of Pythagoras, who had the great theorem, not only a squared plus b squared equals c squared, but also as long as men kill animals for food, there will be war. And we're here also where Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. We're here where Socrates and Plato talked about the ideas of democracy and freedom. And the great thing is that a little bit later today, we'll be going down into the city and speaking at an animal rights march. And again, the people of Greece are showing that they care deeply about animals and about health and about human liberation and animal liberation. So it's an honor to be here in this ancient place. 2,500 years ago, they were talking about the ideas that we're still holding today as ideals for us. It's an amazing place to be.
It was my first animal rights march ever. It's saying in Greece, open your hearts and close the slaughterhouses.
Athens, for your loving hearts for animals. I have been very fortunate to be a vegan now for 38 years. And every year, more people go vegan and more people become aware of the abuse and violence towards animals and vow to stop it. So the most important thing anyone can do is to make an effort to understand the consequences of animal agriculture. So we stand here today for every calf who is stolen from her mother.
What do you think? Nice, right? So some of the books that are in my library that I refer to that are really important, I think, for the vegan health aspect. Have you heard of this book, Why Animals Aren't Food? It's, I think, 600 pages or so, and it's A to Z. If you look up the ailment, it will tell you, and it'll back it up scholastically, it'll back it up with the sources of how it's traced to basically an adverse reaction to animal protein. How Not to Die, have you guys heard of that one? By Michael Greger. And he also has the website nutritionfacts.org. You guys heard of nutritionfacts.org? And you should subscribe to it. He does an email blast where you will get some piece of education in an email, either a video or an article, on a daily basis. And it's really, I heard about it soon after I went through the health educator program, and I just feel like it's like required. It's, you know how when you get a license, if you're a realtor or something, you have continuing education. So I look at this nutritionfacts.org as a continuing education. And of course, some of the newer movies out there, What the Health, you've all seen that, right? And then also Dominion, have you seen Dominion? Yes. So that's the newer version of Earthlings, and that's the one that's very graphic. Very, very graphic. We're going to talk about, we're not going to show the graphic on Wednesday. We're going to talk about what I think the philosophy is behind why we don't like to see it. It says here in Japanese on the bottom, total health from a vegan perspective. And so when I spoke in Japan, one of the last things the organizer said on the phone was, oh, by the way, please come the day before the event and talk and have a meeting with the translator, with the interpreter. And I just and then I hung up the phone. Or you ever notice you don't hang up phones anymore, but everybody still says it? Just saying. Anyway, and I thought to myself, oh my God, that means that I can't use my slides. See, up until then, I've been speaking for years, mostly in the United States, and I would use my slides. And if you've ever made a PowerPoint, given a PowerPoint, you know the slides are kind of like a little bit of a cheat sheet. They're kind of like it's just all right there. So then it occurred to me that I didn't have my slides. I wouldn't use my slides. Otherwise, it would take twice as long to get through it. Plus, they're in English, and it would be useless anyways. Nobody speaks English in Japan. And so it forced me to really reorganize things and look at things, and that actually then became the subject of the book I'm working on now, the Vegan Manifesto, which is the 5 principles of health to save humanity. And what are those 5 principles? That's what we're going to talk about now. You see, Hippocrates, for 65 years or so, they've focused on the person's health, the person's physical body. Yes, you can say they look at the total person, which includes the non-physical, but for the most part, I think it's fair to say that they focused on the physical health. But there's other levels to it, and we'll go over that. So there is a program called Ethical Choices. You guys ever heard of it? They're out of Atlanta, ethicalchoicesprogram.org. That's how you get in contact with them. Send them an email. They will actually, if somebody wants to speak for a living, they will actually pay people. It's $55 per talk, and people make a living out of it. They'll go into you go to schools. You go to middle schools and high schools and colleges. And you can go to a high school and cover like 3 grades in one day. You can give like 3 talks. You can walk out of there with $200. They have some benefactor who funds this for them. The thing is, the competition is very keen. They don't take everybody, and they put you through a rigorous training. I think it's for a week or a week and a half. They'll even fly you into Atlanta. They'll put you up in a hotel. They'll feed you, but you have to be somebody who really, really wants it. And so I wanted to let you know about that because, I don't do this for money. I do have a speaker's fee. When I'm in the United States, what I found is the libraries all have budgets. And so I can speak at the Manalapan Library, and my speaker's fee is $600. They will give me that check. Around the world, I didn't do it for money, and it didn't work out like that. But if you really want to do this for a living, you actually can. And one of the ways is the Ethical Choices program. So now I'm going to give you my talk that I had been giving without the slides. But when I knew I was coming back to the health educators, I wanted to commit this lecture with slides so then that you can refer to it, and it would be easy for me to remember. So welcome to what I call Total Health from a Vegan Perspective. I think that, are you ready now? I'm going to it? You're not ready? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I can prove that we're all vegan once. That when we were babies, if we placed you in the crib, and in that crib we put a rabbit and we put an apple, right? Each time without exception, you and everybody else plays with the rabbit and eats the apple. So I've given many talks on different continents, including the United States, and I feel like pretty comfortable talking with people at this point. The one thing that gives me anxiety, that sometimes I lay awake at night thinking, God, I don't want to screw that up. If I say that the baby will eat the rabbit and play with the apple, I just think, am I going to mess that up? And so I'm batting 1,000. I did not mess that up this time again, so I'm happy about that. So now that we're all grown up, in spite of all of the advertising, in spite of all of the programming, in spite of all the compliance that comes from our families, in spite of all of that, if you see an injured animal on the side of the road, your first inclination is to help that injured animal. But if you were a real carnivore, not a fake carnivore with, I call them kinos, canines in name only. If you were a real carnivore, you would use that opportunity of the injured animal and pounce on that injured animal for an easy meal, right? So ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about just a diet here. Because what does it imply when we go on a diet? It implies we're going to go off the diet, right? If we're talking about a diet, it implies it's only for temporary. It implies we're going to go off the diet at some point. So what we're really talking about, we're talking about a lifestyle. But more than a lifestyle, when you consider, especially for you health educators, it's more than just the health. When you consider that there's deeper levels. And that's what I'm hoping between today and Wednesday, that we can really get a sense and get a feel for the big ideas on the deeper levels of veganism. That besides our physical health, the consequences of our food choices affect greatly our mental health. The consequences of our food choices affect our spiritual health, even our societal health. And the one thing everybody can agree on, even the most rabid meat eaters, they can see it right in front of them and they all agree. Our environmental health is devastated by animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is nothing less than a war on nature. It's nothing less than a war on our bodies, our mind, and so on. Well, let's break it down. Let's talk about our physical health. The reason why it's called Hippocrates Health Institute, the whole reason why, because he said, food is your medicine and medicine is your food. Seems to be really simple. Imagine having ideas so good that they're still talking about them 2,500 years later. I hope that you guys can remember some things I talked about like by tomorrow. That would be an accomplishment for me. That would make me happy. Thousands of years later, these ideas are so important. They're still talking about, they're still aspiring to. But I think like what took, hundreds or thousands of years to happen in humanity now just happens in like a matter of years, if not, or maybe decades or then years. Everything just seems to be moving faster and really compressed in terms of time. And I think if we leverage that as a group and as individuals, if we leverage that fastness, the way progress is moving, I think it could mostly be a good thing. But unfortunately, fast forward to today, it seems like the food industry pays no attention to the health industry, and the health industry pays no attention to the food industry. And I used to think, when I first came into the program here, the 3-week program, about 9 years ago, and then I came back a couple years after that with Pam for the health educator program, I used to think, gosh, if we could just get a room with a nice round table and have Brian Clement come in to the room, and along with some medical doctors, along with some integrative health doctors, along with some herbologists, maybe some Reiki healers, maybe some spiritual healers. We get them all together in a room and hash it out and come up with a consensus. But I learned very quickly as I got into this, it's difficult for a man to understand something when his paycheck depends on his not understanding it. When you go to the cardiologist and you have a bad case of heart disease, he doesn't say, oh, go on a vegan diet and come see me in 2 months so I can document that we halted, reversed, and resolved your heart disease, right? What does he say? He says, if you don't let me take a vein from your leg, if you don't let me crack your chest open and sew it onto your coronary artery, and if you don't give me $150,000 for that, or maybe it's $180 by now, you're going to die. The quote from Upton Sinclair. Let's talk about genetics. They would actually have you believe that genetics are a big part play a big role, in whether or not you get sick. But I'm here to tell you, and people think I'm crazy for saying this. Well, normal people, because what's normal is abnormal, right? What's normal is abnormal. We are obsessed as a society. We're obsessed with this idea of genetics. But we need to be obsessed about epigenetics. I've seen the number as low as 5%, as high as 15%. I have 10% here. That genes play perhaps a 10% role only in whether or not we get sick. So it's really the emphasis should be on epigenetics. And what are epigenetics? Epigenetics are gene expression as a result of diet and lifestyle. The idea is not to allow the bad genes to express themselves. The idea is to let the sleeping dog lie, that we can actually allow good genes to express themselves, and we can suppress bad genes, and we can do all of this with food. So when it comes to nutrition, good genes don't save you, and bad genes don't do you in. We want to let the sleeping dog lie. We can actually turn genes on and off through food. let's look at what happens in the animal kingdom. An example in the animal kingdom with the bees. Did you know that the nurse bee, the worker bee, and the queen bee have the same genes, have the same genetic path? And that the nurse bees produce a food called the royal larva jelly. Have you heard of this? And they feed the royal larva jelly to a chosen bee, and it turns on the queen bee gene. It's amazing, right? And so it is with us, with our food. So then we have to ask, is heart disease hereditary? Is diabetes hereditary? Is obesity hereditary? Are the autoimmune diseases in large part hereditary? Folks, bad genes don't run in the family. Sausage and peppers runs in the family. When I gave my talk in Medellin, Colombia, I said bad genes don't run in the family. Chorizo runs in the family. Did I say that right? Chorizo? Right? Did I do it right? Okay, good. It's kind of like the computer and the computer programs. Does the computer, we're running off of a computer right now. Does that computer determine what you're seeing right now? No. What determines what you're seeing right now is what I essentially put in through the keypad. And that's how it is. That's the analogy I like to use for nutrition. So when it comes to nutrition, genes are like the gun, and bad nutrition pulls the trigger. I referred to Why Animals Aren't Food, that book. It's 700 pages about. But you don't have to read the whole 700 pages. You know why? Because over and over and over again, the theme of the book comes back to this same thing, that if we're eating animal foods, we're eating animal protein. And almost without exception, just depends on your gene path, immediately you'll have an inflammatory reaction. And this inflammation from the animal protein takes many forms. It can take place in your bones, which will show up as what? Arthritis. It can take place in your nerves. It could show up as multiple sclerosis. Autoimmune. The way he explains autoimmune across a myriad of diseases is that we're eating animal protein breakfast, lunch, and dinner since we're babies. Year after year, perhaps decade after decade. And then after a while, our bodies, our immune system mistakes their protein for our protein. And so our immune system starts to attack ourselves. Because all these years it's been attacking this other animal protein, and it gets mixed up. And that's how they think, in large part, not completely, but when it comes to food, consequences of certain foods, with animal foods, that's how it happens with autoimmune. So there's a lot of confusion out there on health and nutrition. And a lot of that is on purpose. The food industry takes a page from the tobacco industry. And this has been shown over and over again. The tobacco industry actually for a long time maintained that cigarettes weren't bad. They actually have, transcripts from their big corporate meetings where they said, all we have to do is confuse people. And then we can get away with selling more cigarettes. They also would engage in, and the food industry does this too, fake studies known as, we call the checkbook science. So one extreme example I'll give you, a theoretical one, is, did you know there's no evidence that if someone jumps out of an airplane without a parachute, that they'll fall to the ground and die? There's no evidence, because it's never been done before. So the food industry and the tobacco industry play these kind of games where there's just, there's no studies ever been done, there's no proof that something's bad for you. So I'm going to give you 3 principles, and it's what I tell people all you ever need to know about nutrition. And now we're going to get into the Hippocrates stuff a little bit. Number 1, all life comes from the sun, therefore eat plants. All life comes from the sun, therefore eat plants. All health centers around the immune system. All health centers around the immune system. And then number 3, my favorite, do the things that are good for you and don't do the things that are bad for you. It's simple but not easy. And I got that from Andy Roman, who, you guys know Andy, who works here. And he just said that as a throwaway line one day, and he even forgot that he said it. And I'm glad that I didn't forget it, because to me that's one of the three most important things all you ever need to know about nutrition. And that's the one I struggle with the most too, because I don't know about you guys, but these new vegan, analogs, these new burgers that are out, the Beyond Meat, and now they've got the crab cakes and they got all this stuff. I mean, I love that stuff, and I have about 10 extra pounds to prove it. And so, to me, it's simple but not easy. We're going to break it down a little bit. Let's talk about how all life comes from the sun. Therefore, eat plants. Let's talk about the sun itself. Guys, do you know that the sun is composed of photons? And to me, this is just amazing, that it takes 200,000 years for a photon cell to come from the middle of the earth, the core, to the end of the sun, to the edge. And then it gets expelled, and it's called what? It's called sunlight, right? And how long, anybody know how long it takes for the sunlight to reach from the sun to the earth? Anybody know? It takes 8 minutes. So we go from 200,000 years to 8 minutes. And so about 500 million years ago, this sunlight started reacting on the earth and creating and generating plants. And those plant leaves started creating these things called phytochemicals, phytonutrients, phytochemicals, which then we come along 500 million years later. And Brian actually calls this proof of God, P-O-G, proof of God. We come along 500 million years later, and we thrive on these phytonutrients, phytochemicals found in plants. So important that right now, as we are here in this room, the pharmaceutical industry has hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists in the jungles, in the Amazon, in the forest right now, trying to glean from the plants phytochemicals that they can take to the laboratory to copy so that they can make intellectual property known as what? Pharmaceutical drugs. But they don't even come close. They just don't come close. So these phytochemicals made from the sun from 200,000 years to 8 minutes to plants to our mouths has the following effect. Research done by Nobel Prize winner Elizabeth Blackburn found that a vegan diet caused more than 500 genes to change in 3 months, turning on genes that prevent disease and turning off genes that cause cancer, heart disease, and other illnesses. Colin Campbell, have you guys read the China study or know about the China study? Raise your hand if you read the China study. How many people never raise their hands no matter what? Raise your hand. A whole food plant-based diet with little or no fat, sugar, salt solves more illnesses than all the pills and procedures combined. And our very own Brian Clement stood up one day at an HAD graduation a few years ago, and off the top of his head said this, and I know it's accurate because I had just so happened to be taping it that day. And he said, decades of evidence lead to one concrete conclusion. Organic plant-based nutrition is the single most important factor in prevention and reversal of all forms of cancer and all-cause diseases. Phytochemical elements found in nature, in the plant kingdom, far supersede even the most ambitious attempts science has made. Here's just a list of a handful of medical conditions addressed by phytochemicals. Alzheimer's, arthritis, asthma, ADHD, cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, MS, obesity, COPD, osteoporosis, Parkinson's, and stroke. We'll just take one plant. Broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts have sulforaphane, a phytochemical called sulforaphane. It's about 50 times more potent sulforaphane than regular broccoli. So that's why we love sprouts here at Hippocrates, because they're basically baby trees, right? These sprouted seeds have all the intelligence of the much larger plant. And so they're packed 30, 40, 50 times more potent than the most perfect whole vegetable that you grew in perfect soil in your backyard and it ripened it ripened, and then you came into the house, you washed it off with reverse osmosis water that had no issues with the water, and you'd still be at, say, a 50 times deficit with the nutrition. So in 1998, Johns Hopkins University, they discovered that this sulforaphane killed cancer tumors, and cancer stem cells so effectively that they patented it. Now, cancer stem cells actually are promoted by chemo and radiation. Did you know that it used to be the number was 94% of the people that get chemo and radiation die of cancer? You know that? And now I've heard Michael Greger on Nutrition Facts saying things like it's now 98%. I just think that sounds too high, but it's coming from Michael Greger, and he's got a lot of credibility. So they patented broccoli sprouts. And actually then it went through a court system because people sued. And finally, about 6 years later, a judge threw out the claim to intellectual property. Well, they patented it, yeah. Yes, they did. Because they could make money on it. It could be intellectual property, right? They could make money. Well, that's exactly what the judge said. A judge with some, I knew you were smart. She said you cannot patent nature. And so the judge said you cannot patent nature, you cannot patent a plant. It's like trying to patent air. So then you never heard about it again. And many people, and I've spoken around the world, and no one's ever heard about this. And I tell them, you had to come here today to listen to a thriving businessman struggling to be a public speaker because you never heard about it. And one of the reasons, we'll get more into that on Wednesday, is there is essentially, I call it the medical meat media industrial complex. The medical meat media industrial complex. And in the medical meat media industrial complex, it's basically an unwritten rule that the advertisers will not publish or run they will not promote things that are detrimental to their advertisers. And who the hell are their advertisers? The food we shouldn't eat, and the pharmaceutical companies that push the drugs, right, that make us sick. And then there's the third one that I love, which is after all those commercials, I was actually going to talk about this Wednesday, but I just love hearing it, is the third one that comes on is the lawyers who are trying to clean up the whole mess. Like, did this drug kill you? You know, that you took the drug because the food was giving you a health problem. So then lawyers come on after those advertisements. So the whole thing is just messed up, right? Just how messed up. So, but that's why we're here. You know, we are trying to, I don't know if you need to edit this out, Tony. We're trying to unfuck the world, okay? Just like that. We're trying to unfuck the world. All life comes from the sun, therefore eat plants. Number 2, we're still talking about the 3 things you need to know about nutrition. Number 2, all health centers around the immune system. As far as I'm concerned, folks, we have a cure for cancer. It's called the immune system. And so when we eat vegan, it's like our green shield. And let me illustrate that in a graphic. I love this chart. This is your immune system. And in this 1999 study, British Journal of Nutrition, it was published, they told these people for 2 weeks, eat only meat and no vegetables. And look what happens to their immune system. 2 weeks go by, they say, keep eating like crap. Don't even change your diet. And here's some store-bought, really crappy tomato juice. So they introduced tomato juice for 2 weeks. And then look what happens to their immune system.
Is this like strictly meat or is it junk food?
When I read it, it's basically meat, I think mostly meat, only meat.
Okay, because I mean, like if it's like fried food and all this stuff, that's a different.
But even so, even if we're eating, let's say, processed food, fried food, whatever it is, still, when we eat a whole food, look what happens to the immune system. So imagine what happens to our immune system when we eat a Hippocrates diet day in and day out. It's even that much better, right? So all life comes from the sun, therefore eat plants. All health centers around the immune system. And number 3, do the things that are good for you and don't do the things that are bad for you. So what we've been talking about up till now is really a plant-based cuisine is a culture of life. It's a culture of life, and it's feminine in nature. Plant agriculture is feminine in nature. Did you know the name Sophia is a Greek word for wisdom? And the ancient Greeks knew that wisdom was inherently feminine in nature. That's how you know boys aren't that smart. There's no name, we never call a boy Sophia. Just doesn't sound right. It's not easy on the ears. It doesn't make sense. So plant agriculture requires nurturing, requires watering, it requires love, it requires giving, it requires taking care of. And animal agriculture, what's that all about? That's a culture of death. That's rough handling, hard-heartedness, exploitation, violation of females, domination of the feminine, which we'll talk more about on Wednesday. Animal agriculture produces killer meat. And so let's break down killer meat. When I was in India, do you know I think 70% of India is the number I heard, are vegetarians. Did you know that? Because of Hinduism. We'll talk more about that Wednesday as well. Hinduism is based on the principle, Hinduism is the mother of all religions. It's the oldest one, and it's based on a concept called ahimsa, which is the principle of nonviolence in all ways, in all things, and all beings, right? So when we went there for our speaking tour, one of the things I said, which I think it went over well and it resonated, knowing that I was speaking, whether they were vegan or not, knowing I was speaking largely to a group of vegetarians who didn't eat meat, I said, okay, I'm in the land of India. And by the way, they all thought I was Indian because of my skin tone, but I'm 100% Greek. But boy, they had me pegged. Everyone thought I was from Punjabi. People thought I was Punjabi, which is in the north. And I'm okay with that. I like to, in South America, people will speak Spanish to me, and I'm okay with that too. But anyway, I would get up in front and I would say, okay, you folks know not to eat the big meat, flesh, meat, big meat known as cows. You know not to eat little meat known as chickens. You know that not to eat, and you don't eat pre-meat known as eggs. And you know not to eat swimming meat. Then I would pause a little bit and I'd say, so why are we eating liquid meat? And why are we eating congealed liquid meat meant for someone else's baby? So whether it's big meat, little meat, pre-meat, swimming meat, liquid meat, or congealed liquid meat, it's still meat. Because again, remember the book, Why Animals Aren't Food? It's all, whatever form it takes, liquid or solid, it's still an animal protein. Depending on our personal genetics, it's going to find a way in the disease path to show up as a problem in the short term and often latent in the longer term too. So, we know about killer meat. We know the number one disease in the United States, number one cause of death, is a 95% lifestyle choice, right? We know that can be halted, reversed, and resolved in large part with a switch to a plant-based diet. We also know about cancer, the antibiotics. Do you know that 80% of the antibiotics in the pharmaceutical industry in the United States goes to the animals, goes to the factory farms, because they're in such terrible conditions, these concentration camps, they're prisons. They're in such close proximity. And so they have to give them more and more antibiotics, and they become resistant, and it creates superbugs. And then guess what? The superbugs are killing tens of thousands of people a year. Did you know that? It's because of animal agriculture, because of these factory farms. People think chicken is a healthy alternative in a meat food. But did you know that 97% of chicken breast has fecal matter on it? It's filled with shit. And this explains why it's many elderly people die from this. It's fatal in many older people, but also things like urinary tract infections by females. Chronic UTIs, urinary tract infections, from the fecal matter in the chicken. Viruses, butcher's warts, chicken pox actually comes not from the chickens, it comes from where? Who? What being, what sentient being gives us chicken pox? Anybody know? Cows. Cows. The autoimmune disorders, we spoke about that. After a while, our bodies mistake their protein for our protein and starts attacking us. That's where autoimmune comes from. So in How Not to Die, he makes the case very good. 15 out of the 16 causes of death are from eating so-called animal foods. Does anyone know what number 16 is? As I just heard a crash and a boom upstairs. So it's good time. Number 16 is accidents. Number 16 is accidents. Of course, we have killer fish. We have killer dairy. You should go to the store and buy Brian's book, Killer Fish. Really great book. It's about 100 pages, and it's a great read. So let's cut out the middleman, and let's get our nutrition from the same place that the fish do. For example, I've been scuba diving. I see it everywhere I go. The fish are herbivores. The fish feed on the algae on the reef. The turtles eat the plants on the reef. There are much fewer types of sea animals that are apex predators. And that's to keep population under control. But for the most part, if we should cut out the middleman. And for the most part, the fish are herbivores. And so we, as humans, should cut out the middleman and get our nutrition from the same place that those fish do. And where do they get it from? They get it from the plants. And so, for example, people want to go out to eat, and they love their salmon, which is now 70 or 80% now they know comes from China, from the fish farms in China, which they have to put pink dye in the fish feed to cover up the black gray color that the fish meat gets because they're in such poor conditions on the factory farm. So plant sources of omega-3, for example. Instead of eating the salmon, let's eat what the salmon eats, which is algae, chia seed or chia oil, flax oil, hemp seed, hemp oil, and also walnuts. Well, the fish don't eat walnuts, but you know what I'm saying, right? So I was a little bit heavier guy, and that was, the title says there, from nutritional vegan to ethical vegan. And that to me is the key right there. We've talked about the health aspect now. Now we're going to go into some of the other levels, some of the deeper levels. And to me, once we tap in, by the way, you is a very powerful word when you're speaking publicly. Be careful. I always try to use we. And if you say you, it's a very powerful word. If you say, you need to change your lifestyle, you need to change your diet, that's kind of like a little attacking the person. So when I speak, and I learned this from some people who speak, and I thought that was great advice. So I always try to say we. Once we make the connection that it's more than us, that it's really not about us. It's not about us. It's about the world around us. It's about what kind of world we want to live in. So when we do it for ourselves, and people come to Hippocrates, half of them are sick, half of them are smart. Some people are sick and smart. And a lot of people, at least half, I say, are up against the wall with a chronic or catastrophic disease. And that certainly gives you the right to want to fix yourself. And Hippocrates helps people help themselves. We don't cure cancer, they don't cure cancer, they don't have any magic dust. They give people the information to helping people help themselves, right? But when you do it for yourself, when you go vegan for yourself, we call that veganism through the side door, right? But veganism through the front door, that's what we're going to talk about the rest of the time. We realize we're all interconnected, that all life is interconnected, that all life is a beautiful tapestry of interconnectedness, and that the food animals have been endowed with an ability to suffer. And so now we will talk about the mental health, our mental health. Because what are we eating when we eat food? No matter what we're eating attitudes. And if we're eating so-called animal foods, what the hell are we eating? You know what we're eating? We're eating domination, exploitation, hard-heartedness, exclusion, elitism. What do I mean by elitism and exclusion? Have you guys heard of speciesism? There's a great documentary called Speciesism. It's basically, speciesism is our idea that us humans are superior to other beings, and that therefore we have the right, essentially, to use them for what we want. Exclusion. We've excluded some animals from our sphere of concern. How many people have companion pets or have grown up or lived with companion pets?
Picture of your cat. So
Oh yeah, you have a picture, right here is a picture of your cat. And how many, and anybody else with a dog? Right, dogs. Okay, so when you look into the eyes of your cat, when you look into the eyes of your dog, you know there's someone in there, right? Okay, so, but somehow we've excluded cows, pigs, chicken, and fish from that. Somehow we've excluded cows, pigs, chicken from that. But at our holiday card or our Christmas card, the family's all together with the family dog just before we go and have a turkey dinner on Thanksgiving, for example. And so what we're causing. On the factory farm, they suffer from, of course, pain. They're scared to death. They suffer from depression, anxiety, and sleeplessness. And then guess what? We go to the doctor in record numbers for sleeplessness, anxiety, and depression. So we're eating these foods that actually affects our mental health. Our values, like freedom, liberation, equality, peace, justice, respect for females, the Me Too movement. How can we say we're for or we identify with the Me Too movement when we're eating dairy products, which dairy food can be summed up in 2 words: sexual violence. So how can we want peace, health, equality, justice if there's absolutely the opposite is on our plate? And this is affecting our mentality. The biggest mental problem that we have when we eat animal foods is that we're disconnected. We said earlier, all life is a beautiful tapestry of interconnectedness. But we're disconnected when we eat animal foods because we would never do the things required to bring meat, dairy products, and eggs on our plate. We would never do it. And yes, thank you. Who do we pay? Who do we pay to do our dirty work? We pay these poor factory farm workers to do our dirty work. And did you know that this group of workers has the highest form of highest level of spousal abuse, highest level of drug and alcohol abuse, and highest level of suicide? Because what they know they're doing is wrong. And there's actually a clinical term for it. They suffer from self-induced post-traumatic stress disorder. Self-induced post-traumatic stress disorder, because what they know, what they're doing is wrong. Our gut health, our microbiome. You know what's interesting about the microbiome study now in science? It's only, I'm going to say maybe a 12 or 13-year-old study as a body of knowledge, our microbiome. Now it's so important, they're realizing they're calling it the second brain. Our microbiome, our gut is actually, they're calling the second brain. And did you know that I think it's 70 or 80% of our serotonin is in our gut. So when we're eating plant foods, it's essentially, without getting scientific, it's sending happy signals to our brain. When we're eating rotting, decomposing flesh, it's sitting in our gut and it's sending a different signal in our brain. But the real reason why vegans score higher for happiness is because we shit more. We shit more, about 6 times more. About 6 times more. And that is a blessing. If you can relate, you know that that's a blessing. So this plant-based way of living, this plant-based diet actually when it comes to our mental health, will solve more depression than all the pills combined. Let's talk about our spiritual health. The consequences of our food choices greatly affect our spiritual health. And I'm sure you've heard of the term karma, which is the law of cause and effect, right? And when it comes to what we eat, when it comes to eating animal foods, basically, we kill the animals and the animals kill us. It's the boomerang effect. Bessie's revenge. We talk about that more on Wednesday. What goes around comes around. Let's talk about the major religions of the world. Veganism is in profound alignment with the major, but yes.
I was just wondering about that principle as like you're showing me a picture of this dog. Like
Can
we're applying it to the dog, like
Yeah.
that it's meat, or is it gonna die? That doesn't quite
Yeah, ask me about that later. We'll talk about that.
okay.
Yeah, sure. We'll talk about that. Veganism is in profound alignment with the major religions of the world. Buddha and Buddhism. Buddha was a vegan, espoused a diet without the shedding of blood. I could go, when I was in Asia for 90 days, for 3 months, I could go to any restaurant, although I did seek out the vegan restaurants through Happy Cow. Do you guys use Happy Cow? Heard of Happy Cow? I used it. I think I have like some kind of high-level ambassador badge from Happy Cow. I gave, I think, 400 reviews and in my travels, and I'm some kind of grand wizard of the Happy Cow. And anyway, I could go anywhere in Asia besides if I didn't use Happy Cow. I could just go to a restaurant and say, please give me the Buddhist meal, without even seeing a menu. Just anywhere in Asia you can go and say, give me the Buddhist meal, because they know that essentially is a plant-based meal. And of course, we talked about it. The Hindus have ahimsa, which is the principle of nonviolence. And then my faith tradition, Christianity, and the Judeo-Christian faith tradition has the 10 Commandments. Not only thou shalt not kill, but thou shalt not steal. We're stealing milk. Thou shalt not covet. We're covering what someone else has. And thou shalt not commit adultery, which includes the things you have to do to get milk from a cow. Includes sexual involvement. So I don't care if you're the Pope or you're the president. If we're eating animal foods, we've hit, at least from my perspective, we've hit a spiritual ceiling. We've hit a spiritual ceiling. So the question I have, and we're going to look at a video on Wednesday that asks this question in some detail. Why aren't the religious leaders teaching the original teachers? Or if they're holding themselves out as spiritual leaders, why aren't they, practice what you preach, right? Why aren't they doing that? Just a question. But we're talking about religion versus spirituality. And I bring up the example of ride sharing with Uber. How many people have used ride sharing? You've been in an Uber car before? And I'm so proud, I have a 4.95 Uber rating. I don't know where that 0.05 points came from, but I really want 5 stars every time. And you know what? And the driver wants 5 points too. But you guys know there's a point system, right? When you think about it, the reason why we're nice to each other in our day-to-day is because you can retaliate and I can retaliate if you don't like what I do and I don't like what you do. If I came up to you and smacked you, you might roundhouse me and knock me out. So we're cool, so I'm not going to do that to you. And so with the Uber driver, he's nice to me, I'm nice to him. The biggest complaint with Uber drivers for the passengers is that the passengers slam the door. So I even have a little dance when I get out, and I always ask for 5 stars, and I want him to see just how nicely I'm closing the door, because I really care about that 5-star rating. But to me, the spiritual breakthrough occurs when we honor and respect and treat nicely those who cannot retaliate. That's namely cows, pigs, chicken, and fish. Physical health, mental health, spiritual health. Let's talk about societal health. The main idea is we will never have a society where we treat each other well so long as there's violence required by our food choices. Does that make sense? That what we do to the animals we end up doing to each other. Now, I'm not that smart. I didn't think of that. I got it actually from my relatives, the ancient Greeks, the Dwems, the dead white European males. And of course, in the Eastern traditions, they had a version of this too. Let's just look at what the ancient Greeks says. Ancient Greeks said, Pythagoras said, so long as man kills animals, man will kill each other. The Pythagorean principle. He who sows the seeds of murder and pain cannot reap the seeds of joy and love. And did you know the term vegan is only several decades old? I think it was coined by Watson in 42, 44? Anybody know? But before the 40s, the vegans were actually called themselves Pythagoreans. So it wasn't just the theory for the triangle, which Pythagoras invented, but he also had the Pythagorean principle. Socrates said that eating animals creates a karmic effect and makes our soul dirty. And Plato, who wrote the Republic, said that the vegan diet gave him mental clarity and stamina to write a book like the Republic. And in the Republic, Socrates argues with Glaucon that meat-eating societies will lead to disease, will lead to war, and will require lawyers to sort everything out. Does that sound at all familiar? A little bit of foreshadowing there, right? Gandhi, more modern times, he said the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way it treats its animals. Leo Tolstoy, so long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields. Sir Paul McCartney, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, we would all be vegetarians. But this is just philosophy. These are just philosophical ideas, right? Well, let's actually connect the dots of history. There are two institutions that are not pretty, that have been violent and have done a lot of harm in this world. And the first institution that's a direct creature, a direct result of animal agriculture is armed conflict, war. Cows through history have always meant wealth, and that's how war was born. As a matter of fact, the oldest word for war, the Sanskrit word for war in India, they had the first word for it, Gayam. And this word Gayam means the desire for more cows. Did you know that? The word for war literally means the desire for more cows. It's right there for us to see how it happened. The very word capitalism, which I happen to be a fan of, they're saying do away with the word capitalism now. We don't want to use that word, we want to call it voluntary exchange. Voluntary exchange actually is how 1 billion people in the last 20 years came out of poverty. Just after World War II, 90% of the people lived in abject poverty. Did you know that? Now about 8% of the people, by the same standard in today's dollars, live in abject poverty. And that all happened with voluntary exchange. But I digress. So the very word capitalism comes from per capita, which means per head of cattle. Why do you think they call it the stock market? And the fancy English word pecuniary actually comes from the Latin, which means animal. You see, when you wanted to get more wealth back in the day, you think we had a world like today where somebody could invent Uber, become a billionaire, or somebody like Jeff Bezos could think of Amazon and become a billionaire, and everyone around them become multimillionaires? Income mobility is something very new in this world. And somehow some of us have an idea that there's a lot of problems. There are problems, it's not perfect. But for thousands of years, I'm going to say 10,000 years, the income of the average person was about zero. The only people who had wealth had the animals. So when you wanted to get more wealth, what did you do? You found out where the king or the warlord in the next region over had the animals, and you went to war to take his animals. That's how it all started. And then, if you weren't killed in the battle, guess what happened? The second institution became a slave. So, when I talk about this stuff, and the reason why it turns me on so much is, I'm not just up here chasing butterflies. I think that the reason why the world is screwed up is because we eat animals. It's a war on our health. It's a war on our mental health. It's a war on our spirituality. It's screwed up society. And then finally now, we'll talk about environmental health. Because animal agriculture, like I said, is nothing short, nothing less than a war on nature. And so we don't want to judge, we don't want to ridicule people, but there's nothing more ironic, that's the word, than an environmentalist who eats meat, which is just about every one of them. Like this meme says, and then the meat eater said, Happy Earth Day. I mean, come on. Certainly can't be an environmentalist and eat animals. And this is the one, actually, most meat eaters will agree. They say, you know what, you got me on that. It's true. You guys, have you watched Cowspiracy? So I've taken some of the basic numbers or some of the big ideas from Cowspiracy, such as 45% of the continental United States is covered with animal agriculture. And that's 7 times the coverage of housing, shopping center, roads. And people talk about urban sprawl. What about animal agriculture sprawl? Housing, roads, shopping centers is only 7 times. So what is that? What's the numbers on that? I think it's like 10% would be housing, shopping centers, and roads. Monocrops. We have to chop down the rainforest, have to chop down forests. And that not only kills the animals that we eat, but also kills the animals that are existing in their normal habitat, right? When we chop down their forest. So there's species extinction going on. And so it's totally unsustainable situation. Water. 52% of the municipal water goes to feed the animals. So when you go to California, like I like to do once or twice a year, there seems to be in LA County always a drought situation. You can't wash your car, you can't water your lawn. They put this crazy thing on the shower head so you get like a trickle, and you got to flush the toilet like 3 times to take care of your business. You see, the 3 times is for us vegans because you realize once you go vegan, you've been constipated your whole life and you didn't even know it. Dead zones. The runoff from these factory farms goes into the tributary streams and then ends up in the Gulf of Mexico by Louisiana. And you can see an area of 5,000 to 6,000 square miles where everything just dies. It's a war on nature. And then, speaking of the oceans, we're heading toward fishless oceans. We are witnessing right now, people, the collapse of the marine ecosystem. I've been scuba diving now for only 10 years, but in the 10 years, I've actually seen it. In Thailand, where you saw video, we didn't see one shark, which I love sharks. They're the most misunderstood animals. In my book, you'll have to read about, I have a whole thing about how nice sharks are and how afraid they are of us. But in Thailand, there wasn't one shark, there wasn't a lot of fish, and it's a problem. And they say in the coming decades, I think by 2040, we're going to be out of fish. And I don't even want to know what that means. We're going to be, they're fishing out these huge trawling, they have these big nets that are like a mile wide and like a mile down, and they get everything. In the deep sea fishing, only about 50% of the catch is the target fish. And then the non-target fish get swept up and they die. And they grind them up and they eat them, they feed those to the cows. Anybody ever see a cow fishing before? Any ever see a cow hunting in a stream for a fish? But that's what the hell is happening because it fattens them up and it gives them more milk. Now we're going to talk about climate change. It's so easy to just say we agree with climate change. In Cowspiracy, it says 52% of the greenhouse gases are due to animal agriculture, but cars, rail, and aviation is only 13%. But if you actually read if you actually read a lot of the information that's out there, there's a lot of scientists, credentialed ones, the ones that don't get money from organizations, that will say that CO2 has very little or nothing to do with the temperature of the Earth. CO2 is the lifeblood of the planet. Did you know that? CO2 is not a poison. And there are many governments have, including our own, NOAA, the Navy organization that handles climate data, they've been caught changing the numbers. Did you know that $10 billion a year goes to studying climate change? And every one of those dollars goes to the assumption, like a checkbook science, goes to the assumption that global warming is caused by CO2 and global warming is man-made. To my knowledge, not $1 goes to studying the possible, and what I think more likely, natural causes of climate change, which is, it's real simple, it's the excess energy of the sun. And so what we know, and actually a vegan medical doctor, rabbi, and vegan who's a colleague and friend of Brian's, Gabriel Cousins, you know Gabriel Cousins? So he's really onto this possible climate change hoax. And what he talks about, he's a really smart guy, he's sold as many books as Brian. There's this 200-year cycle with the excess energy from the sun gets hot and then it also gets cold. And right now we're in a cooling stage where last year and the year before, the size of 40 Manhattan Island in New York City, size of 40 New York cities of ice has grown. So right now we're in a growing period of the ice caps. So I'm not saying, here's the other thing. When it comes to environmental health and studying veganism and its effects on the environment, there are 16 things, and 15 we can agree on, right? And so my thought on that is, if two people agree on everything, one of us is not thinking. So just remember that. We don't have to agree on everything. Because if 10 people agree on everything, I don't know how many of us aren't thinking, but it's probably a high number. Maybe half of us aren't thinking. So just something to think about. Great YouTube video if you actually want to see a documentary about what I'm talking about. The Great Climate Change Swindle. Boy, is that garlic? I could taste the garlic. The number that I like to keep in mind, 15 to 1. 15 to 1 ratio, plant agriculture versus animal agriculture. Plant versus animal. It takes 15 inputs to make 1 unit of animal food. And it takes 1 input to make 1 unit of plant food. So it's a 15 to 1 ratio. So all the grain, there's so much grain, most of the grain that's grown goes to feed the animals. And so we got it used to be 1 billion people a year, now we're down to about 600 million people a year starving. Mostly because of voluntary exchange. Because as the population has gone up, the actual number of starving people has gone down, which I think is a really good thing. But right now we're growing enough grain to feed about 11 billion people. But most of that grain goes to feed the animals. Terribly inefficient system. So we talked about the benefits of a plant-based diet on our bodies, the hazards of an animal-based diet. We talked about how the consequences of our food choices affect our mental health, our spiritual health, our societal health, and our environmental health. And so I'd like to close with some ideas here. I call it the liberation of it all. You see, the things that we talked about that weren't so nice to hear about violence against animals, about heart disease and cancer. And when we say things like cancer, it's not just the people who get sick who suffer. What about the people and our families who have to take care of the people that are suffering? It's not just the food animals. Like I said, it's the habitat that other animals are living in that get wiped out because we have to grow monocrops. So there's reverberations, there's levels of destruction here. But this is really, really good news to me. And as health educators, I hope it's good news to you too, because it doesn't have to be this way. Veganism is a way out. It's walking through a different door than the doors we've been previously shown. And the price we pay to walk through that door is that we give up the animal products. But around the world, whether I was in India, when we go to these places and we speak, they treat us like royalty. And the host people they're so proud. And it's not like we're staying in Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton. Nothing like that. But they feed us so well. So the spices of India, the sauces of India, the vegetables, I don't know, the only way I can put it is they look weird. I don't know the names of these vegetables. There's so much variety. And then you have the root vegetables of Japan, and you have the exotic fruits of South America. And so the reason I say all this is because we're really not giving anything up. We're really gaining. We're not saying no to meat, dairy product. Well, we are. We're not saying no. We're really saying yes to a variety of foods that we really never thought about before. We're saying yes to compassion. We're saying yes to liberation. We're saying yes to health. We're saying yes to so many more things than we're saying no to, right? We can have peace. We can have justice. We can have freedom. We can have equality. We can have more respect for females. But we have to be willing to give these things. We can be free, but we have to free them first. With the 40 lectures that I've given in 15 countries, the thing I learned, out of all this, you know what I learned? The only person we can change is ourselves, right? The elevator pitch. Have you heard of the elevator pitch in business? And you've got only, you get into the elevator and like your boss is there, or the CEO of the company who maybe you've never even met, and you've got like the greatest idea that's going to change the company, it's going to be so profitable, and you have maybe 10 stories to give him the elevator pitch. So people say, why be vegan? And I'd like to show you this quote. And we're not going to try to change anybody, we're just going to plant it. We're going to plant it deep into their mind and their heart. I'm deeply grateful that I discovered that the only reason I was eating animal food for all those years that I did was because I was just following orders. Fortunately, I discovered that those orders were not in my best interest or in the interest of our world, and so I'm not doing it anymore, and it's fantastic. I'm deeply grateful I discovered that the only reason I was eating animal foods is because I was essentially following orders. And now I'm not doing it anymore, and it's fantastic. Boop, boop, boop. The elevator opens up, and he gets out. But guess what? You've just planted something that's like a depth charge deep into their soul. Where is the soul, here or here? Anybody know? Somewhere. You planted it somewhere inside. Is it here? In the third eye, maybe? Yeah. Whoop. And then there's the staircase pitch. The elevator's broken that day, so we got to use the stairs. And so I'm walking up the stairs. You know, I'm on a coffee break because, you know, I like to take a lot of breaks. And the big cheese, the head honcho, is running down the stairs. He's late for a meeting. He says, "You're the vegan guy." I say, "Yeah." And he will ask me, "Well, why be vegan?" And I say, "Because nothing tastes as good as vegan feels." Nothing tastes as good as vegan feels. So on the count of 3, let's all say, "Nothing tastes as good as vegan feels." Wait, 1, 2, 3. Nothing tastes as good as vegan feels. Ladies and gentlemen, that's total health from a vegan perspective. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. And we've got plenty of time. It's awesome. We have plenty of time. And so, does anyone have a question, comment? I'm sorry, what is your name? I didn't mean to cut you off before. Nina. And we were filming, so I didn't want to, I wanted to keep it moving, so I apologize for that. But
my question earlier was just about...
But wait, you were late, so wait, we want to talk to someone else. No, I'm just kidding.
I was healing, and then I ended up falling asleep in the nap after.
Okay. Naps are allowed.
Yeah.
Okay, Nina.
Can dogs and cats be vegan? Because you're saying, you start vegan karma.
Right.
It's like, well,
Okay, so the question is, and I love this question. Thank you so much for your question. The question is, can dogs or cats be vegan? But I think the larger question you have is it okay that dogs and cats are vegan, because what about this whole karma thing? Well, is that right?
Right, and also, can I have my cat be vegan?
Yes. So yes. The answer is you can definitely. Your domestic pet, whether it's a cat or a dog, can thrive. I mean, their hair will never look better. They'll never look happier. They'll never be happier with a vegan diet, and especially they love algae. And I've seen that. I've seen that myself. The dogs for sure love algae, and they make. If you Google it, they definitely make vegan cat food and vegan dog food. And when it comes to that, like people say, well, lions eat meat and so on. Everything according to its design. Every sentient being according to its design. Dogs and cats, cat is part of the cat family. They have a physiology for meat. They have a body for meat. Animals that eat meat were put on this earth to control the population of other animals. That's the bottom line. We, on the other hand, we have a choice. We have a choice, and the reason why the movement is growing, the reason why people are getting an awareness is because there's an inherent wisdom, a Sophia wisdom, that's feminine in nature, that knows that, but men have it too, that knows that it's just not right. That basically this whole meat thing is part of it's basically a bad dream, like an ideological trance. It's a trance of history. We don't know why it happened. Well, we'll talk about it on Wednesday, which is about 10,000 years ago, they started confining animals against their will. And that's how civilization started. Basically, the entire world is organized around eating animals. And we're actually succeeding in changing that paradigm. That's a great question. Thank you. Anybody else? I love question and answers. So please ask me anything. It doesn't have to be about this. Anything. Yeah.
What was like your biggest takeaway from traveling all the time?
My biggest takeaway from traveling all the time was that it's really hard. That I had broken bones, lost cell phone, broken hearts. Just everything. It became a real drag. But as far as the people go, I learned that there's nice people everywhere. I learned that despite globalization, that there are cultural differences are so numerous. I also learned just how tribal and even racist people are. People think the United States is racist. That's complete bullshit. Because we actually have people from all 5 continents that have to deal with each other on a daily basis. And I go to Asia, where to me they all look the same, and they're making fun of each other for their ethnicity. I go to Croatia, and the northern Croatians look down on the southern Dalmatians, or they call them the Dalmatians like the dogs, because they think they're lazy. And the southern Dalmatians think the northerners are like robotic Germans. But they're the same people. So that was one of the things that really stuck out. The Japanese don't like the Chinese. The Malaysians don't like the Japanese. A lot of it has to do with war and the way history happened. And I found it really interesting how, on the other hand, here in these United States, and in my experience, there are people from all over the place that get along really quite well on a daily basis without any issue. So I thought, does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
It sounds like, because it seems to me like you know so much, right? So you just continued the education after you left the educators program?
Oh, right. Mm-hmm. Question is, did I, he said, it seems like I know so much, so thank you for your compliment. And Sam asked me, did I keep my education going? So yeah, that's the thing. Somebody once told me when I graduated college, they said, okay, school's out, graduated college, class starts tomorrow. Like, it's just the beginning. And, I've seen some people go along and, we talked about the eCornell course on nutrition that you can get online, but maybe you don't have, you're going to go and do other things and not have the time. So this nutritionfacts.org, The Real Truth About Health, which is Brian's website, and people, look, everybody can take 2 or 3 weeks in the year. If you get a real job, you can still take vacations, right? So time your vacation to go to the Real Truth About Health conference, which is free. You know, like stay in a Motel 6 down the street for $50 a day and go and, I mean, you get incredible knowledge from these conferences. And read books, what do you call it, the documentaries. You just, you know, if you're hungry for it, you're going to keep feeding that hunger. And, you know, I think it's great. A lot of people continue it. And, you know, it also breaks my heart when I see health educators on Facebook, like, you know, not being vegan anymore, you know. Or like a reunion happens, you know, so a reunion happens and we go to dinner and we're at like an Indian restaurant and like, you know, like 4 people aren't even vegan anymore. Like that to me, and again, I think, and I touched on it today, it's once you make the connection that it's more than just our bodies, that there's so many levels of destruction against us and everything around us. Think about it, if the whole world went vegan, almost all the problems in the world would stop. You know, the oceans would come back, we'd stop polluting the environment, people would treat each other nicer, you know, people would be, if you feel better, you're gonna act better, right? The whole world would be just unscrewed up, at least from my perspective. Anybody else? Yeah? Nope? We're a little early. Do you have anything that you want to say, Pam, or do? Right.
Is that she was here a year ago, and she says, Phil's changed this since I
Mm-hmm.
saw it last time. So you are constantly upgrading. I don't mean upgrading in the sense of you're just including more of what you've gained over time, and also something that you mentioned as far as distilling.
As what?
Distilling it.
Oh, right.
Right, like he's
Yeah.
also not adding it and making it bigger. If it makes sense, he's adding and making it smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you can fine tune to the point where you can continually make it more succinct, and yet more valuable. Like these things seem to be opposites, but it's kind of like homeopathy.
Yeah.
The less you have, the more value it provides. And
Thank you.
that's where we, as people, like as we get clearer and clearer on what it is that matters to us, we start saying, okay, this one wasn't quite as important. This one is way important. So I'm going to get more information on this. And you just get more crystal clear, and your message gets received as such. And so I just want to honor you for your, as kind of like what Sam said, is your continual growth.
Thank you.
And evolution in front of all of us. It takes courage and it
Thank
takes
you.
commitment.
Thank you. I want to thank you so much. I want to add something. The reason that, and if you read my book, and for me to be here today, it's really not about, never want to make it seem like, look at me doing all this cool stuff. What I really want to do is inspire others to whatever they want to do, whether it's a food concept, whether it's a delivery service, whether it's opening up some kind of private practice. I just want to hope that what little that I do can inspire others so that their life can be adventurous and extraordinary, and that to be continually worthy of a life well lived. You know, when I left Nepal after I spoke, I'm on the runway and there was a big explosion, and I actually felt it, and there was a crash landing right in front of our plane. 70 people, 40 people died. 10 people they never found. They were just, burned, incinerated. And, like I just said, I just want to continue to be worthy of a life well lived, because my cup has been very full in the last couple decades, and I just want to continue to do what I can, do my part.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. Thank you.